On Saturday morning, Emma woke up with a simple plan. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't going to work. She wasn't meeting anyone. She wasn't solving anyone's problems. She wanted one quiet day, just for herself. A small bookstore, a cup of coffee, a walk through the park. Nothing extraordinary, just peace. As she reached for her jacket, her phone vibrated. Her older sister. "Could you come over today?" Emma looked out the window. The morning sunlight felt warm. For a brief moment, she imagined saying yes, like she always did. Then she quietly replied, "I'm sorry. I already have plans today." There was a pause. "Oh, okay." The call ended. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody argued. Nobody became angry. Yet something inside Emma immediately felt heavy. She stood there, still holding her phone, wondering if she had just done something wrong. The cafe she had been looking forward to suddenly didn't feel exciting anymore. Even while ordering coffee, a quiet voice kept repeating inside her mind, "You should have gone. What if she's disappointed? What if she thinks you've changed?" The coffee smelled wonderful. The music was soft. People around her laughed. But Emma wasn't really there. Her body sat in the cafe. Her thoughts had already left. By the afternoon, the guilt had grown stronger than the decision itself. She wasn't enjoying her day anymore. She was defending it. Inside her own mind, why did protecting one peaceful afternoon feel like hurting someone else? The answer didn't begin that morning. It had started many years earlier. As a child, Emma was often praised for being thoughtful. "You're such a good girl. You always think about everyone. You're so easy to rely on." Every compliment quietly taught her something. Being loved meant being available. Being kind meant putting yourself last. Little by little, her own needs became something that could always wait. Years passed. She grew into an adult who found it much easier to disappoint herself than disappoint someone else. That afternoon, she looked at her untouched coffee and whispered, "Why does choosing myself feel so wrong?" A few days later, Emma met an old university professor for lunch. He noticed something almost immediately. "You look tired." She smiled politely. "I'm fine." He didn't answer. Instead, he asked a different question. "When was the last time you did something without worrying about how someone else would feel?" Emma laughed softly. "I don't know." And for a moment, she realized she genuinely didn't know. The professor picked up 2 empty cups from the table. He filled one with water. The other remained empty. Then he slowly poured water from the full cup into the empty one, again and again. Soon, the first cup was almost empty. He looked at Emma. "What happens if no one ever refills this cup?" She watched the last few drops disappear. "It becomes empty." He nodded. "Exactly. We often tell people to keep giving, keep helping, keep understanding, keep sacrificing. But very few people ever ask, who is taking care of the person who keeps giving?" Emma stared quietly at the nearly empty cup. For years, she had believed that putting herself first was selfish. She had never considered that constantly ignoring herself could also be unhealthy. Many of us learn this lesson early, not through rules, not through punishment, but through praise. "You're so thoughtful. You're always there for everyone. You're the one we can count on." Those words sound beautiful, and they are, until they slowly become the only way you believe you deserve love. Without realizing it, your worth becomes connected to how useful you are. So every time you choose yourself, your brain interprets it as a mistake, not because it is wrong, but because it feels unfamiliar. This is where human behavior quietly shapes our lives. The mind always prefers what feels familiar, even if that familiar pattern is slowly exhausting you. Real emotional intelligence begins when you notice that guilt isn't always a sign that you've done something wrong. Sometimes, it's simply the feeling of breaking an old habit. That afternoon, Emma walked home alone. She replayed the conversation again and again. For the first time, she wondered, what if this guilt isn't telling me to go back? What if it's only telling me that I'm finally changing? She stopped walking. The question stayed with her long after the street had become quiet. Maybe the hardest part of choosing yourself isn't making the decision. Maybe it's surviving the guilt that follows. The following weekend, Emma's phone rang again. This time, it was her mother. "Your aunt needs help moving some furniture." Emma looked at the notebook lying open on her desk. For weeks, She had planned to spend this Saturday finishing a personal project she had abandoned months ago. Her fingers tightened around the phone. The familiar guilt returned almost instantly. For a second, she almost said, "Of course." But instead, she took a slow breath. "I'm really sorry. I can't today. I've already made a commitment." There was another pause. Then her mother simply replied, "I understand." That was all. No anger. No disappointment. No argument. Emma slowly lowered the phone. She had spent years imagining that choosing herself would damage every relationship she cared about. But reality was much quieter than the stories inside her mind. Later that afternoon, she sat beneath a large tree in the park. Children laughed nearby. Dogs chased each other across the grass. The world continued, exactly as it always had. It suddenly occurred to her that life had not fallen apart simply because she had protected one afternoon. Many of us confuse discomfort with doing something wrong, but they're not the same. Growth often feels uncomfortable because we're stepping outside old emotional patterns. For someone who has spent years putting everyone else first, choosing yourself will almost always feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar emotions are often mistaken for guilt. Real emotional intelligence isn't learning to stop caring. It's learning that caring should never require abandoning yourself. Healthy relationships don't ask you to disappear. They make room for both people. Emma smiled, not because the guilt had completely disappeared. It hadn't. But this time, she understood that guilt didn't have to make the decision for her. She closed her notebook, picked up her bag, and continued walking, not away from the people she loved, but toward a version of herself she had ignored for far too long. Maybe choosing yourself isn't selfish. Maybe it's the first promise you finally decide to keep. Thank you for spending these moments with Psychology Canvas. If today's story resonated with you, subscribe for more journeys into human behavior, emotional intelligence, and overthinking, because every mind has a story, and every story deserves understanding.